Hello everybody, today's build is showcasing my AK, a perfectly normal AEG that's completely stock and has no modifications whatsoever. Haha, I really got you with that one, didn't I? Assuming you're still conscious, you can now see that it may be just a tiny bit different than what the average person would think of when hearing the word AK. At this point, you're probably thinking, dude, that's kinda sus.
Stop posting about Among Us! I'm tired of seeing it!
Enough joking around, let's get into the build. These modifications were done mostly out of necessity. The original components were bought used and the externals were in very dire condition. The front was completely gone except for a roughly cut down and incredibly loose outer barrel. The internals weren't much better. The wiring was in really bad shape and the motor didn't inspire confidence. I changed out the motor for a short Type 22 TPA ZCI high torque motor and redid the wiring using 16 gauge MPPE EcoWire Plus. A gate WARFET was also installed because I run 11.1 LiPo batteries. According to the person who sold me the gearbox, it has a Lonix red piston, SHS 13-to-1 gears, a Retro Arms Type B CNC trigger, a Lonix enhanced cylinder set, and a pretty soft spring. He also said the piston and spring were pretty worn out, but the rest of the parts were lightly used. All other components besides my own are stock SEMA 035 parts. I haven't opened up the gearbox, so I don't know the exact state of the internals. It shoots 0.25 gram BBs at about 300 FPS and 25 rounds a second on full auto. It's pretty snappy, but it does sound like a chipmunk in a blender. Moving on to the externals, an important aspect about this project was that it was completed in 3 separate stages. The front assembly was first, then the M4 adapter, then the dust cover. I only planned to do the front assembly, but as time went on I got bored and I had to mess with it, so I decided to stray further and further from the light. The batteries I use are brick-shaped, so I wanted an easy access point to store them. Watching my friends undo butt plate screws or cram wires down their buffer tubes was an experience I was trying to avoid. Thinking about how belt-fed LMGs are loaded gave me an idea. I decided to house the battery right on top of the outer barrel. The top half of the shroud acts like a door to a very roomy chamber. I later added bubble wrap to make sure the batteries didn't wiggle around and cause unnecessary chafing. The parts were designed so they would fit together really snugly, as well as drilling and tapping the metal outer barrel for additional attachment points. This ensured all parts were as rigid as possible. Just because I was using a 3D printer to make the components didn't mean I was going to settle for a flimsy build. Additionally, I decided to make the outer barrel longer than the inner barrel, in case I wanted to replace the inner barrel with a longer one. I really liked how the cannon on the Bradley Armored Personnel Carrier looked, so I added fluting as well as a slight taper to the outer barrel. I also added threads for my tracer unit, but I ended up just making a knurled thread protector because I don't play indoors or at night. Next up, we have the M4 adapter. Why would someone do such a terrible thing to a perfectly good AK? I was looking for PTS palm oil mags, but I couldn't find them in stock anywhere. I was pretty bummed out, but then I got the brilliant idea to use the PTS M4 mags instead. After all, they were easily found, proven to be reliable, and built well. One small issue though, stock AKs don't take M4 mags. I knew what I had to do, and after I was finished, no AK purist would be able to look at my creation without immediately scheduling a therapy session. The first challenge was the position of the BB feed hole on the AK mags compared to M4 mags. AK mags have the feed hole in the middle, but M4 mags have it at the front. Lining up the M4 mag with the hop-up unit would take up most of the room inside the trigger guard, and that would make it really cramped. The solution to this was tilting the mag forward slightly. Doing that increased the distance from the magazine to the hop-up chamber. This resulted in a waste of more BBs when reloading, so I came up with a BB retention system and tested it out. A few revisions later, the mechanism was small enough to fit into the unused space. It also pushed the mag out a bit, which helped speed up reloads. I also moved the mag release above the mag instead of behind it the way M4s are set up. You may have noticed in that last clip that the magwell walls are extremely thin. This leads me into the biggest challenge of the build. No matter how good a design is, if it can't be built, you're back to square one. 3D printing is a useful technology, but it has its trade-offs. The surface finish of features at the top and parallel to the layer lines are really good compared to those on overhangs or in contact with supports. The magwell was tilted, so I set up the printing orientation of the part to optimize surface finish on what would be touching the magazine. This reduced mag wobble and ensured that the moving parts would not get stuck on each other. The poor surface finish of the area in contact with supports was reduced by making the core piece as small as possible. All of these additions needed to be mounted to something. Instead of drilling into the receiver, I reused the screw holes for the front assembly. The receiver was sandwiched between the barrel assembly and the M4 adapter assembly, making the connection to the core piece really rigid. The core piece's role was housing all the moving parts but not to withstand sideways forces. That was the job of the external shell. Since it was separate, I could print another one if the original was damaged. This was the first time I came up with a gun modification of this level. The M4 adapter came out pretty well, but there are some things that could be improved. I must admit that the 8 screws on the front are way overkill. That was just for the looks to blend in with the grip grooves. 4 would have been plenty. The trigger guard isn't all that rigid. It was a last minute thought because I realized I couldn't use the old one, but didn't want to completely ignore it. Finally, because the screws from the adapter go into the barrel assembly, it has to be loosened to get the gearbox out. This had to be done when it was stock, but the user needs to be more careful not to shift any parts out of position when the screws are out. Besides that, the BB retention mechanism does its job, the assembly doesn't bend or creak, and there are no feeding issues. The last part of this project was the dust cover. Throughout the design process of the previous 2 assemblies, I had to disassemble and reassemble the gun many times. Each time I needed to take out the gearbox or fiddle with the front assembly, I had to deal with a shaft and spring that gave the dust cover button its resistance. The parts kept jumping out at me, so I got rid of them completely when the spring launched itself directly into the most cluttered corner of the room. That was the last straw, and I started working on a dust cover button that was completely integrated with the cover. I got that finished, so I took the opportunity to match the sci-fi design of the other parts. That's all I have for this build. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. You can find the links to the full assembly and disassembly videos in the description. If you are interested in purchasing the gun, you will have to wait a while because I will not be home until May 2022. It will be listed for $300 not including shipping, and I will post a video with more details then. Since you've watched the entire video, let me outline what you can expect from me in the future. I enjoy airsoft and paintball, designing and building things, and making videos. Every time I go out and play, come up with a new project idea, or anything else, I try to get better. I know how to edit videos, and I'm learning how to use camera equipment to get crisper and better looking footage. I have very little free time, so you should expect 1 to 3, maybe 4 videos a year. That sounds bad, but I absolutely refuse to post something that is not an absolute banger of a video. Gameplay is not off the table either. I am in the process of dialing in my GoPro settings. When I do post, expect mostly airsoft and build process related content, especially unconventional stuff like this. While I have done typical high cap and M4 builds, I prefer building and using stuff no one has seen before. Last thing, you can find me on Instagram at VM_innovations.